Well, I'm about to be joined by a gentleman who had a long and distinguished career working for the ABC, in particular radio and television, working alongside some of the greatest names ever to work for that particular company and in Australian media. He's also served on the board of Harness Racing New South Wales and more recently has become very heavily involved in owning trotters once again. So I'm very pleased to say a long-time friend, Alan Gaskell. Well, Alan, before we look at this marvellous career of yours, you're from the land of the long white cloud. Whereabouts?
Born in Christchurch, Mick, and saw my first New Zealand Cup at the age of 7 in 1954, won by the immortal Johnny Globe.
And this is where your desire to get involved in harness racing commenced?
Yeah, my late grandmother was my mentor. Her husband was a saddle rider in New Zealand, the old days when they used to ride them. So she got me involved, took me to Addington. I used to bunk at school and I used to ride my bike to Addington and stand on my bike and watch them go down the back straight at that world famous track. And once you're hooked on harness racing, you're hooked.
Do you have a hero at that particular stage, Alan?
Don Nyan and Johnny Globe and Lordship and Rob Allen, Dennis Nyan, Wes Butt. So many great names, Mick, as you know, in my era. I'm 73 years old now. I'm talking about when I was in the 20s.
What about the move from New Zealand to Australia? How did that all come about, Alan?
I went to London to work for the BBC and then there was a job offer for the ABC in Adelaide. So I came back here in 1977, read the news on ABC television Adelaide, worked at TUE, worked at 2KY with some great names, Ron Casey, Peter Bosley, Ian Craig, Max Presnell. I was there for a long time at 2KY, so that was the reason I came back from London.
Well, you've already virtually answered the question next time around about how to get involved then with the ABC.
There was a job going which I auditioned for, and back in those days, at the risk of being somewhat modest, it was a pretty hard audition to pass, and I did manage to pass the auditions, and they said, well, there's nothing in Sydney at the moment, you better go to Adelaide. So I went to Adelaide. Until this day, that was where my love affair began with Globe Derby Park.
Now, when you linked up with ABC here in Sydney, you had the chance then to work with some of the greatest names to grace the ABC and Australian racing and television, full stop.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mick. I was around in the James Dibble era. James left just shortly before I arrived, but on a more modern note, I had the privilege to work with great commentators like Peter Dawson, Smokey Dawson, Jim Maxwell, David Morrow, Peter Walsh, Neville Oliver, Alan Marks. Oh, they were some great names. They were the halcyon days of the ABC, and I was just lucky enough to be a grandstand presenter and a newsreader.
And in those days as well, we had the likes of Jeff Marnie, the greatest. I had both the privilege and the honour working with Jeff for many a year. David Morrow, Andy Vincent at the trots at Harold Park.
They were the glory days. They were the glory days. I've got some fabulous stories to tell about Jeff Marnie, but sadly I can't on television. Jeff called a spade, as you say, Mick. Wonderful man, accurate caller, and a legend.
Yeah, one of the nicest gentlemen I've ever come across, but also the likes of Gordon Brave, Jimmy Maxwell, Peter Wilkins. And one thing, out of all these gentlemen, Alan, they were greats, no egos. They always wanted to help you.
It's a terribly good point, Mick. They were so humble, and I still talk to Jim regularly. I speak to Peter Walsh. David Morrow is one of my great mates. There was no ego with them at all. They were just good at their job, as you know, and they were just part and parcel of the establishment. They are household names, and they were just so unaffected by it all.
And they could do anything. Jeff could call boxing, the Olympics. David, well, we know David could call everything. But every ABC commentator during that period of time could do anything you wanted to, as far as two flies up a wall or anything in the Olympic Games.
That's very true. I was lucky enough to host the America's Cup way back in 85, I think it was, with Alan Marks. Norman May was another great mate of mine, the great late Norman May. He taught me so much accuracy, how to speak, how to put your shoulders back, put colour into his calls. So you're right, Mick. I was so lucky to have so many fabulous mentors in my career at the ABC.
Talking about being able to speak, you are widely recognised as having one of the most purest and most envied voices amongst everyone that has worked for you or worked on radio. Possibly John Law's the exception, the legend, but was there a lot of training going into that voice or did it come natural?
I never had a voice lesson in my life. My mum and dad wanted me to become an accountant. I used to drive them mad with a jam jar up to my face in Christchurch when I was about 10, calling the trots. I knew then that I wanted to do something with my voice, but no, I've never had a voice lesson in my life. I just think it's a gift I've got. We've all been given some gifts, and that was the gift I was given.
It's also taken you outside of the circles of the ABC, the ground announcer at the Sydney Cricket Ground, also Cogra.
Great times at Cogra. Great times at the SCG. Once again, I can tell you so many funny stories. But a pleasure to be there for 8 years at the SCG. Best seat in the house. Watched everything. Rugby league, the Pope. Commentated on the Pope when he came to the SCG in 88, I think it was. But great job was the SCG ground announcer's job.
Can you give us an example of, say, Reg Gasnier going to score for St George, and maybe a cricket one as well?
Well, I had an altercation once with the great AB, Alan Border. And I can't remember the name of the cricketer, but, you know, in my tones, I'd say, ladies and gentlemen, the incoming batsman for Australia is Stephen Waugh. And AB called up to the ground announcer's box and said, he's known as Steve Waugh, not Stephen Waugh. And I went, OK, AB. That was just, but we had some wonderful repartee at the SCG, Mick, and as I say, best seat in the house. I was admonished. Ground announcer for the Swans, and being a mad Swan supporter, I stepped out of line a couple of times and used to say when the opposition scored a goal, I'd say, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, by the way, the umpires today are Mick Kokas and Joe Bloggs," and you know everyone would boo, and so yeah, I was a bit naughty at times, but back in those days it was a bit of fun.
What about scoring the football, Al?
Eastern Suburbs 52, St George 0. Mad Rooster. I'm a mad rooster. Mad, you know that.
Well, you wouldn't have got on very well with Morrow there.
No, Morrow and I had so many arguments because, as we all know, David, God love him, is a mad dragon. I'm a mad rooster. Look, we respected each other. And look, St George are my second team. So my days at Cogra, I was in the days when Brian Smith coached the Mighty Dragons. And Jeff Carr was the CEO. Had some great times down at Cogra.
What about your time working on the Board of Harness Racing New South Wales?
Such a wonderful time, Mick. Chris Downey, the minister, called me in and said, we want you to go on the board. Jim Walsh was along with me. We had some other lovely board members. Brian Judd was the CEO. One of my great loves is to get my hands dirty, if you know what I mean, and just talking to the owners and the trainers. And I remember having a fabulous interview with the late J.E. Binskin, and he said, "Oh, Al, I'm so glad you're on the board. You can come down to the stables and talk to us." And you know, that was one of my great loves, is to just talking to the wonderful industry people on whose behalf I was put there.
Now, what about the recent involvement in harness racing? As far as I know, you've the past 12 months you've been building up a very strong profile.
Yeah, look, I took a break from harness racing for a while, Mick. I came down 12 months ago to watch the Chariots of Fire, and I got a phone call from Tim Butt. I went to school with Tim's mother in Christchurch, the wonderful Jennifer Butt, who's had some great horses in her own right, Vulcan and Take a Moment. Tim said, "Al, I think it's about time you got back into harness racing." I went, didn't take me long to say yes. So I took a share in a lovely horse called Parama. I took a share in Franco Norway. I've got a share in a trotter with Tim called Aorangi. And just recently I've got a share in a lovely trotter called Funky Monkey, who won here last Tuesday. So I've got the drug back, Mick, and I'm well and truly hooked again.
What about the prospects of Funky Monkey here on Saturday night? I think it'd be very hard to beat.
I'll tell you what, look, she was awesome last week. I know, I said to Robbie after the race, I want you to answer me a very honest question here, Robbie. I wear my heart on my sleeve, as you know, Mick. You've known me a long time. I said, Robbie, did she do today what you thought, or were you not quite as confident? He said, Al, she didn't do as much as I thought she would do. He said she is exceptional. Standing start Saturday night, Mick. She's had plenty of standing starts. I spoke to Brad Williamson today. We bought her from the Williamsons. She said, Brad said she'll begin. She begins like a rocket. So look, we're excited, Mick. She's a lovely trotter, and you saw what she did here last Tuesday. So I've got the drug back.
Well, that's great, Alan. It's great to see you back, and great to be reminiscing about all those wonderful people that we've known and worked for and admired for so many years with the ABC.
Harness racing, though, Mick, is full of beautiful people. Well, you know that. I've known you for a long, long time, but harness racing is full of beautiful people, and I love the standard red horse. They are the most majestic animals. Thanks for having me.